Well, good morning. I hope that this finds you in a good place. We're in our Holy Week devotionals together each day. We are looking at the last week of Jesus' life, and we're looking at his feelings, the feelings of those around him, looking at each day and why it was so special. Yesterday, the one point on Monday was when he overturned those tables, understanding that each year Jesus would go back and to bring in a lamb or to bring in an animal, a dove, for sacrifice. And each year he would do this. And each year they would exchange money at a different rate and rip people off and let you know that your donkey or your lamb was just not quite good enough. It's a good lamb that you bring to sacrifice, but it's not good enough. It's not going to pass the test. But we have some for sale over here if you would like to buy one. And they would rip you off in the courts. And not only were they doing that, they were doing it in the court of the Gentiles, which was where they went to worship. And they weren't of the Jewish faith. They were worshiping their God, and they weren't of the Jewish faith. And they were being distracted by this. Instead of doing it in the Jewish courts, for the women or for the men, whatever court they would do it in, they did it in this court where the Gentiles were. And Jesus saw this happening and was upset. I think Jesus' emotions are at a high point anyway. It's the last week. He understands what's happening. The Palm Sunday crowd. He understands where they're going to be on come Friday. He understands all of it. And I think it's all coming to a head. It says that he wept. And here today, for me, this has been revealed to me that what happens today on Tuesday of Holy Week is powerful, more than it ever has been for me. We've read these stories, but as I dissected it for these devotionals, it's pretty powerful that Jesus has had enough. He's had enough, and he's letting them have it. It is time. There's times in Jesus' ministry, from his mom, whether at the wedding when he turned water into wine, all the way up through, he was asked, to do more possibly, and he would always say, "It's not my time yet. It's not quite the time yet. It's not the right time yet." Well, it is now. This is his last week of his life. It's time. It's time to let it all out before he goes to that cross, which he knows he will, and he knows he has to. But this week, he leaves no stone unturned. He lets it all out. And today, it's a powerful message. I'm not going to read. There's a lot of verses that I've come to understand for this day. All the parables are here. But I will walk you through this in as short amount of time as possible. But I want to let you know that there's many verses to be reading, and I won't share all of them, but I will share a few. It is Tuesday of Holy Week, and Jesus is back in the temple, and the religious leaders have a plan. It's time to trip Jesus up in front of the crowd. He flipped the tables, money went everywhere. It's now time to put him in his place. Their goal is to discredit him, shame him, and quiet him. When we discuss the opposition that Jesus faces, though, we must understand that it did not come from the Jewish people in general, but primarily from the religious leaders and rulers, especially the high Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. The center of this opposition is nowhere other than Jerusalem, and particularly the temple. That's where it all went down. So it was in the temple that various opposing groups engaged Jesus in a series of verbal altercations in front of everyone. The Gospels record a number of these controversies as occurring during Jesus' final week in Jerusalem. The challenges to Jesus appear as a series of rapid-fire encounters during a single day. Jesus' questioners were those who consider themselves religious, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the scribes. I'm going to read from Matthew 11, but you can find this in the Holy Week on Matthew 21, 23 to 32. I'm going to read from Mark 11, 27 to 33, and then you can also find it in Luke chapter 20, 1 through 8. But Mark 11, 27 to 33. The authority of Jesus is questioned. They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you the authority to do this?" And I'm reading out of my Red Letters Bible, and I love it because anytime I see red, I know it's Jesus speaking, and I get excited about that. Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question." Now remember, this is it. This is the last week. He holds nothing back. This is amazing what transpires on Tuesday before Easter of Tuesday of Holy Week. He says, "Let me ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? Tell me." They discussed it among themselves. I could see them huddling up, right? They don't want to say the wrong answer. They huddle up. They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven," he will ask, "then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men," they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they stopped. They stopped talking. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." And so he just stops the bus and he allows them to, again, have no answer in front of everyone that he was being tripped up to answer, right? And so he doesn't quite answer their question, which leaves them upset again. This is happening in real time, in public, because they want an audience. They want to get the crowd back, but it's not working. And now everyone is paying attention. If Jesus didn't raise eyebrows when he flipped the tables, he's certainly raising them now. Then it goes into parables. And I'm not going to read them all, but again, like I said, I'll give you the scriptures for them. Answering by parables, Jesus leans in with 3 parables, and they aren't subtle. He brings the parables of the 2 sons, the tenants, and the wedding feast. They're each a sermon in themselves. They all point to the religious leaders as unbelieving, treacherous, disobedient, and outside of the kingdom. Jesus is exposing the hypocrisy and pronouncing judgment just as publicly as they question his authority. I love it. They thought they'd trap him in public. I love what he does. I'm telling you, he just cried the day before. Jesus wept. He's coming through. He's looking ahead to Friday, and he feels it's time to just let it all out. Can you imagine the crowd at that point? What level of shaming or disdain do you hear in the air, right? Or was it just awkward silence, hard stares? What about the rage in the hearts of the priests at this point? They look like fools, right? They can't find a good way to arrest Jesus without inciting a riot. They're afraid of a mob. They're stuck. They keep trying to trick him into incriminating or discrediting himself. There are illegal and theological questions put before him, all tricks with the end goal of Roman arrest or religious heresy. Jesus answers them all perfectly with questions of his own. He answers with the wisdom of God and leaves them speechless, but most doubling down with resentment and anger. The controversies range over a variety of topics, with the Jewish leaders testing Jesus by calling into question his God-given authority. Jesus responded often in parables that challenged official Judaism. All three Gospels recount the parable of the vineyard and the wicked vine dressers, which Jesus adapted from the prophet Isaiah for his own situation. Matthew's parable of the wedding feast shows the rejection of Jesus would bring judgment. If you want to continue to read, it goes into Matthew chapter 21 into 22, Mark chapter 12, 1 through 12, and Luke 20, 9 to 19, continue into the parables. He's then questioned by the Pharisees and the Herodians. The Pharisees presented Jesus with an apparently no-win situation. If he told them to pay taxes to Rome, the Pharisees would discredit Jesus with the Jews. The Herodians, who supported the Roman occupation, would brand Jesus as a traitor to Rome if he did not support taxation. Jesus' answer challenged both groups. The denarius bore the image of the Emperor Tiberius Caesar in support of Rome's right to require taxes. And that is shared again in Matthew 22. If you keep reading these, it's a lot. I didn't realize when I went into this how much was in on Tuesday of Holy Week, these parables. But Matthew chapter 22, if you keep reading, Mark 12, if you keep reading, and then Luke. And then he gets questioned by the Sadducees. And this is important. The Sadducees were the priestly sect among the Jews that had charge of the temple sacrificial system. They were more aristocratic than the other sects, and being theologically more liberal, here's the point, I want you to get to Sadducees, not Pharisees, Sadducees. The Sadducees were the top, right? They were the head and religious group, and the Pharisees were there, but they were a little bit more liberal. They did not believe in afterlife. They didn't believe in hell. They didn't believe in the resurrection, right? Their belief system didn't go to those things, where the Pharisees did, right? So the story of the seven brothers may have been one of their primary illustrations to ridicule the idea of the resurrection. They didn't believe in it. While the doctrine of the Sadducees was opposed to the Pharisees, they both were trying to discredit Jesus. So there's four different groups here trying to discredit him, right? And Jesus answers most of them almost each time with a question of his own. So if you keep reading in Matthew 22, Mark 12, and Luke 20, it gets into those. And at this point, Jesus seems like ready to be done with it. He really does. He leans in again with his own question. And this is when a scribe actually comes up. While some Jewish leaders tried to trap Jesus into making discrediting statements, a sincere scribe asked about God's true purpose. And I love this. This is where Jesus starts to let it fly. In Matthew, Jesus returned a question to the Pharisees, challenging the false understanding of who Christ would be. He would not be only a human, son of David, earthly king. David himself called the Messiah his Lord in Psalm 110. And so that's where Jesus asked them about that. And so how then could the Pharisee call him anything less than his Lord? They looked to David, they looked to the Old Testament kings, and David himself called the Messiah, the future, the coming Messiah, Jesus, his Lord. With the priests and the Pharisees silenced, Jesus lets them have it in front of the crowd. And this is it. This is his last week of his life. And this is what I shared yesterday. This is it. If this was your last week, who are you talking to? What would you like to say to them? Who would you like to make sure understands who you are and who you believe and who you say Jesus is? And that's what he asks over and over and over. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? All right. Yesterday we talked about him coming into the temple, into your heart. Would he be flipping tables in your heart? Would he be flipping tables at what he sees going on in the temple? Or would he be saying, well done, thy good and faithful servant? Today, he is challenging the religious leaders that they have been misleading people. They have been misleading most of these people. Jesus came to turn it upside down. And this is what he says to the Pharisees here. They were silent. He pronounces 7 woes, woe, 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 with specific accusations about their character, sin, and condemnation. This is the religious leaders of the time in the temple with thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews coming home to Jerusalem during this time. It's the perfect time. He already flipped tables. He already upset everybody. Everyone's watching. They want to see what's next. And they keep firing questions at him, and he answers them with his own questions. And in this moment then, in Matthew 22, 34 to 46, Mark 12, and Luke 20, he pronounces these 7 woes that attack their character, their sin, their condemnation. And he does it in the temple, in front of the crowd, to their faces. And he ends it with this question: how are you going to escape being sentenced to hell for your beliefs? How are you going to escape being... And he says this to the religious leaders in front of their people. It's crazy. He isn't playing anymore, right? He didn't come to align himself with the priests and the Pharisees. There are no more veiled statements or subtle parables. And the day is ending with everyone clear about where Jesus stands. I love it. He makes no mistake about who he is at this moment, or what he thinks of the religious leaders of the day, right? The old way of life in the temple is over, and the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees were just put on notice that their time is up. What do you feel standing in the crowd after hearing Jesus say all that to these so-called holy men? How tense is that room, right? How tense is that room at this point? And what would you feel if you were the priests and the Pharisees? You just want this guy to shut up, go back to the sticks. In front of everyone, he's exposing every shame you hide, every sin you minimize or justify, and he's dropping truth bombs all over your self-made kingdoms. They feel threatened, they feel cornered, they feel insulted. Some of them are confused, but all of them are lost. And they don't like feeling this way. They're not used to feeling this way. That evening, Jesus heads home with his disciples, and while they walk back to Bethany, a group of men stay in town, meet up in the dark of the night, behind locked doors, and start talking. You know this kind of talk, the airing of complaints, of frustration, mounting anger, and wounded pride. How dare he? Who does he think he is? Doesn't he know who I am, who we are? Someone needs to shut him up. Did you see the way the crowd looked at him? The way they look at us? This is getting out of hand. And then a plan comes together. A plan to make him be quiet, to make him an example of him, and to teach the crowd who to follow. They can't arrest Jesus with everyone in town. It'd be too risky. He's too popular. The quickest they could do it is after dinner on Thursday. The Passover meal will be over, and people will be sleeping off dinner and leaving town to get out ahead of the traffic. With the crowds lessening under the cover of darkness, they can put things into motion that will make him pay. They certainly want to make him pay. Their plan is in motion. Jesus asks us one question in all of this. He was talking to the religious leaders at the time for misleading the people. He had came at such a time as this to get it turned around. He knew Friday was coming, but he also knew so was Sunday. He knew what today brought. He knew what tomorrow would bring. He knows that now, even in our own lives. And he asked us the same question: who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? When you look around in our world today, whether it's the government, whether it's other people, whether it's your coworkers, even family members, do they know who you say Jesus is? Do they know who Jesus is to you? May God add his blessing to the reading of his word.